The Ottomans were seen as an enemy
That's
of
possible.
countless cultures,
That's
of countless peoples. They were a despised empire because they were a despicable
No, that's not
empire.
true. So what? That's not true. So what
What
about?
about the Roman
So
Empire?
so what about
They was love?
what about Elizabethan England then? Queen Elizabeth, she was in alliance with the Moroccans, who in turn were in alliance with the Ottomans. So that's what I'm trying to say. You have to be very careful how you portray history. Another thing, the Ottomans weren't possibly not liked because they're the enemy or they're rivals. Who likes their rivals anyway? But that doesn't take away.
We're talking about the Ottoman slave trade.
No, hold on.
That's what we're talking
we
about.
can't just talk about
Why
one
do you
thing
want
in
to talk
isolation.
about everything?
No, why? Do you know why?
ISIS
No,
do it,
hold
it's
on,
wrong.
hold on.
The Ottomans
Let
do
me
it, it's
finish
right.
this.
The reason why I'm not talking about isolated elements like systems like slavery is because slavery predicates not only on slavery itself. Slavery is a system that is based upon it's supported by church. It's supported by
the
governments.
caliphate.
And it's supported by policymakers.
By Muhammad.
You said that
Muhammad was a policymaker.
You said that slavery.
Muhammad was a policymaker.
Thank you very much. You said that Christianity or that slavery emerged with the Enlightenment period. Now explain to me. In 1659, when the first settlers settled in the south of North America, Protestant settlers, Pietism was their religion. Calvinists, who owned slaves. The founding fathers, deeply religious men, who believed that it was the natural cause to own slaves. Now, am I going to pin this back to Christianity? I'm not doing that. Because
But I am pinning it back to Muhammad.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
I pin it-
Muhammad had slaves.
Allow me to
One
pin
second.
it back to your Christianity.
1 second. No, one
because
second.
according to your
Mr.
Bible,
Bean, no, don't
you
force your
talk
way
too
into this
much
conversation.
and you cut everybody
talking
out.
to Dawood.
You know, I can
Talking to
give
Dawood.
you.
Dawood, you
Luke
said when
12,
ISIS had slaves, it was
47,
wrong.
48. Luke
When the Ottoman
12,
Empire,
Why?
when the Ottoman Empire
12,
had slaves,
47,
you
48.
said on some occasions
Timothy.
it was okay.
1
Now
Timothy
let's round this
6,
up. When Muhammad had
verse 1,
slaves, was it
2.
right or wrong?
When Muhammad had slaves, it was right, yeah.
So when Muhammad took slaves
Ephesians.
back into slavery that their masters had released, was that right or wrong?
5.
I don't agree.
Ephesians
I don't know.
6:5.
That hadith sounds very
You don't
strange.
agree, do you?
No, the hadith
In
sounds
your
very
heart,
strange. The hadith
Dawood,
sounds strange.
they're Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari.
Exodus.
So what?
Now, so what?
21,
Do you remember one of my
7,
other reasons? 1
11.
second. So, right, let's just move back a bit. Let's just move back a bit.
Leviticus
Move back. Come with me,
25,
Dawood. Move back a
44,
bit.
46.
Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Move back a bit. Right. There we go. Dawood, let's just get this clear, right? You're saying. Remember, one of my other reasons for rejecting Islam is that even
Prophet
when we
have
use
servant, not slave.
Sahih Hadith,
The Prophet
like Sahih Muslim
have servant,
and
not
Sahih
slave.
al-Bukhari, that I said, you remember because you were listening in, I know you were.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah? I said that we see Muslims chuck those hadith under the bus.
Yeah.
I quoted Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Muslim about Muhammad taking slaves back into slavery. And you want to reject Sahih hadith. And the reason why you want to reject Sahih hadith, but that's what you're doing.
Because Quran
that is what you're
encourage-
doing.
Those particular ones, I do not know.
Exactly.
Because
exactly.
Quran-
I do not know.
You're
The Quran
embarrassed by your own
encourage-
hadith.
I don't know.
They are Sahih Muslim, Sahih al-Bukhari.
Bukhari
Either
came
throw
200
them
years
away
after the Prophet
and
death.
throw Muhammad along with them,
Yeah.
or embrace them and say you're proud of the example of Muhammad.
I-
But Muhammad,
The Prophet encouraged free and slavery.
took slaves back into slavery that had been released
This
by their
contradiction
masters.
to the
Was that
Quran, which
right
is
or
wrong.
wrong?
Okay.
It's wrong.
Okay.
It's wrong. Because Quran
You need Jesus, Yahweh.
encourage
You need Jesus,
encourage
Yahweh.
free as a
May I
slave.
say something?
And that's why the Prophet
you
was
basically said to me
fought
that
by others.
Habibi,
No, Habibi.
you can look. This man knows you. This man knows your name. which
I was
means-
supposed to talk to him,
I
and
know,
you
but
come
he-
along,
yeah, and he
and
didn't
he
wanna-
just
he didn't wanna talk to you.
using you for whatever
Come
he
on down.
wants.
You just have to go, press on with the heckle.
Yeah, press on.
I do it every
Yeah.
week.
Okay, you said
Yeah.
Sahih Hadith, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now I don't know if you know this. You probably know, maybe not. Look, the hadith. Have you checked the isnad?
Are you about to say?
No,
that-
hold on. Have you checked the isnad of the thing?
Right, a Sahih Hadith.
No.
Dawood,
no,
Dawood.
no.
Don't care.
Please answer what I said to you. Did you check the isnad of the hadith?
No, I trust Bukhari and Muslim.
Okay. Did you know?
Did Sahih and Muslim check the Isnad?
No. Did you know?
Did Bukhari and Muslim check the Isnad?
Okay, but did you know that also? Yeah, there are certain.
So sorry to disturb you guys. I'm going to pray. Can you keep
Yeah.
an eye on this?
Did you know that there are well-established hadith that everyone says is sahih?
Yeah.
It's a Muslim and it's a Bukhari.
Yeah.
And then when you go into the isnad and you see, oh, it's disconnected. So
Don't you see that proves my point?
No, it doesn't prove your point.
What was
Let
my
me
point
finish,
about
let
the
me
hadith?
finish.
Go on,
Let me
Dawood.
finish.
Go on. Sorry.
The point I'm trying to
I
make.
apologise.
Yeah.
Now I apologise.
The point I'm trying to make is the hadith, yeah, on its own itself sounds strange because I know that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would encourage, plenty of times in the seerah you find that he would encourage the manumission of slaves, himself freeing slaves. Aisha radhiyallahu anha, she's known to have freed 200 slaves just on her own, Aisha. Now, I find the hadith strange. I'm not saying it's not true, okay? I'm not saying you lying, I'm just saying I find it strange. Therefore, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and do my homework, right? So, there was something else that you said, I forgot, sorry.
Okay, so let me reply to what you're saying. Because you're proving another point. If you remember when you were listening in, I said that Muslims can't agree about which hadiths are reliable. And
Yeah,
that
to an extent.
even when
To an extent.
we use the hadiths that they say are reliable, like the Sahih hadiths, which are checked by Bukhari and Muslim, who check the isnads and check the matin and do the whole hadith science, that even today Muslims will chuck those hadiths under the bus. They will distance themselves from those hadiths because they find them embarrassing or they find them against their own conscience. And that is what Dawood is doing right now. He is distancing himself from Sahih Muslim hadith and Sahih Bukhari hadith, in which Muhammad told that slaves who had been released by their masters needed to be taken back into slavery. And the reason why he is doing so, Dawood, is because you are a better man than your prophet, and you know that if these hadiths are true, then Muhammad was a horrible man, and you don't want to be a horrible man, and I applaud you for it, but I
he
say
condemns the
that you
prophet.
should follow
Jesus.
that logic out of Islam to a better example, the paradigm of Jesus Christ.
Don't
Because
call
if
people
you're
pigs and
saying
dogs.
that even your Sahih hadiths you cannot trust,
No, I didn't say that. I
Hadith
didn't
is
say
not
that.
holy.
you're saying that
The
they
Quran
sound
is holy.
suspicious.
Yeah, that sounds strange.
Right, but the point of the matter is, my friend, these are hadith. This is your literature I'm using.
The hadith comes 200 years after
Identified
the death
by
of Prophet.
your
It might be
scholars
false.
that you say
Old
were the
Testament.
amazing people
Yeah.
who collected these hadiths, and they're called Sahih for a reason. What does Sahih mean for the camera?
Every single hadith.
Authentic, isn't it? Like,
Authentic.
Authentic,
But-
trustworthy.
Yeah, but some
There
of
you
them,
go,
they
but you
are
don't
not.
want to trust it, do you?
No, not all of them.
Okay.
There's 7,000
So,
hadith.
I'm talking to
You cannot-
Dawood.
I'm talking to you.
all I was saying, yeah?
Yes.
All I was saying is,
There's
I
7,000
just wanna
hadith.
open up a
It's
bit the
impossible
understanding of what
that all
Sahih is in
hadiths
this
are
one.
right.
There are different.
There must be false
You know there are different
and
books,
authentic
right?
and
And every scholar has
fabricated.
that's why there's the differences, and that's why some people don't agree. Because every scholar has its own methodology and
Even the
tolerance
children,
how
even the
to
children.
look at hadith. First of all,
Even the donkeys.
I don't.
You see, you're getting involved in the argument again, bro. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
So I'm not denying the hadith. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not wrong. And I'm not. And the reason why I'm saying that they sound strange, I should actually take that back. They don't sound strange, but what they do is they. From the little knowledge I have, it does not seem consistent with the Prophet, and also they seem very surface-based. What do I mean by that? Every hadith, I would love to read this hadith with commentary, and I would love to read the hadith with its historical context. Okay, what happened? Why did the Prophet say that? All this hadith is saying right now is just telling you there was a situation where there was someone was freeing slaves, and the Prophet came and said like, no, free those two and those two. That's all it's saying. It's just that. But I want to know why and the background maybe, and then I can come back to you and be like, oh, so the hadith, the reason why that was the reason is because those two other slaves were taken forcefully from someone else. You know, I'm speculating, but I'm saying that there could be another reason why that happened that way. So I just want to look at the hadith. I'm not denying them. If they're Sahih, we say they're Sahih Bukhari, then they're probably authentic. Yeah, Sahih Muslim. They're probably authentic. But I just want to have a bit more meat.
Let me reply, because what you're saying is, it doesn't sound like the Prophet. It sounds suspect because it doesn't sound like the Prophet.
Not consistent, yeah.
But firstly, that's another problem with the hadith literature, is it's full of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
But the second problem with
that's due to my knowledge,
the second problem with that is also the Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad practiced slavery.
Yeah.
The Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad tortured people. The Sirat literature, the Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad had people assassinated. The Sirat literature confirms that Muhammad waged war against other people. So if you're going to, and also, Dawood, the fact of the matter is, if you go and use Sirat literature in the game of trumps with hadith literature wins over Sirat literature. Hadith literature is what you use to understand the Quran, not Sirat literature. So your defense is weak, but your defense is also flawed, because what you're really saying is, I don't want to believe that Muhammad is the kind of person that would take a slave back into slavery after he's been freed by his master. But anyone who does real history goes off what the sources say, and those sources say that there was a master who owned slaves and he let them go free, and then Muhammad stepped in and he said, no, bring them back into slavery.
Yeah, and I want to know the context of that. That's all I'm saying. I want to know the context.
The Quran also
says.
Do you know the context, by the way? The Quran also says that you can own women as slaves and have sex with them. That is a right given to you in the Quran that I read to you. The right hand possession. The right hand possession. The right hand possession. Permitted to you are your wives and those that your right hand possess. Clearly, and those that your right hand possess is not also your wives, because that would be naming the same category twice, and that would make the Quran guilty of being just jumble nonsense.
Okay, you know that verse, for example, what your right hand possess. As someone who lives in the 21st century in London, how would I implement that?
Right, but the reason why you can't implement that is because you live in a society that was influenced by Christians like William Wilberforce, who stopped slavery. However, you go to Sudan, you can do that. You go to Mauritania, you can do that. You go to Saudi Arabia, you can do that. What do those three countries have in common? Because it ain't ethnicity, it ain't language, it ain't economy, it ain't culture. What's the one thing that they've got in common? What's the one thing they've got in common? What religion?
Islam.
There you go. That's the problem.
But then, look, this is what I'm trying to say.
Look at what you've done to
I
the
think
world.
you're brilliant. I think you're brilliant, and I think not brilliant, but you're good, right? I think you're very good. But what I would love you to do, as someone who speaks and someone who wants to be scholarly, you really have to start to apply the holistic thing. When you say, for example, it's just religion, it's not religion. For example, there's a report that came out recently by the BBC, and it looked at slavery in Kuwait. And they were selling. Look, honestly, I'm talking
slavery in Kuwait.
They're selling slaves on Instagram and all these. You can go and have a look on BBC. There's accounts.
What's the primary religion of the Kuwait?
No, hold on. Before we go to religion, the report focus on the economy. Now, why is it so?
Because it's the BBC, and the BBC wouldn't blame Islam for anything.
No,
even a jihad.
But you see, this is what I'm trying to say. I think you have serious blind spots, and I ask Allah to help you to remove them. But the point I brought Kuwait into this is because in Kuwait, the economy permits it. Why? I think every second person has a maid or something. 2 in 4 women have a maid in Kuwait. What? has that to do with the religion? No, it has to do with the possibility.
Thank you.
Has to do with the possibility and the capabilities that they can afford such things. It's to do with the policies that the government has been, the kafaya policies, sponsoring, to have a sponsor and come into the country. So this is what I'm trying to say to you. When you do this, when you just look at the religion, you are just looking at one aspect. And because there's some truth in that aspect, you're misconstruing reality. What I'm asking you to do is like, look, have religion and be critical of religion, but then also look at all the other facets that contribute towards something.
Let me reply to that point.
One last
of
thing.
course. Yes, of
the last thing is, for example, and you see where the fallacy comes in. You do this the same thing when you want to validate something. You say, for example, Christianity was the driving force that abolished slavery. No, it isn't. If you talk to any historian, they will tell you one of the major reasons, and that's why the government got involved and paid out on reparation to slavers, was because of the economy. The economy changed. Oh, you know what? There are these Quakers. They've been saying for 200 years now to us to abolish slaves. You know what? Time permits it now. Let's pay out all the slavers. Let's pay out all the slavers.
Let me reply.
David Cameron is one of them.
Let me reply.
His family.
Because unfortunately, Dawood, you don't know church history. I know church history.
It depends. I don't know
The
everything.
reality is, as far back as the 10th and 11th century, so this is still in feudal times, when the economy was dependent on serfdom, slave labor, Christians were abolishing slavery.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
At the same time, Muslims were enslaving people.
Define what you mean by
slavery. The idea that I can own you as a possession and you are my property. That was abolished in numerous Christian countries right from the 5th century onwards. The Byzantine Empire abolished slavery. It abolished
by the state. Or were there people or were there individual saints who were
over the course of church history, both.
But
Over
Jesus, he didn't abolish it. Jesus, he didn't abolish it.
1 second.
And look, 1247.
Dawood,
Jesus
you
confirmed
made a
slavery.
claim. I'm going to have to shout. I'm not shouting at you. I'm just shouting over him.
Yeah.
Right?
I listen.
So you made a claim that I'm being narrow, that I'm only looking at the religious aspect.
Theology, yeah.
But let me just demonstrate why you're wrong in your counter-thesis. Because on numerous occasions in the course of the last hour or two that we've discussed this topic, I have used Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula as an example. Why did I do that? Very deliberately. Because we both know that in terms of what has fashioned the culture, economy and politics of that peninsula since the time of Muhammad, it has been Islam. Which means that in that region of the world, if Islam had the ability and rationale to abolish slavery, you would be able to point to the example of Saudi Arabia as having done so, and at no point at any time has it or have you. It didn't abolish slavery, the Saudi Arabian state, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which I know is not 1400 years old, but my logic stands that area of the world never abolished slavery, either by the direction of a government, either in Damascus or in Constantinople, nor by the will of the people, i.e. the people themselves saying, it might be legal for me to do this, but I don't want to do it. Which means that Islam never transformed their hearts to want to do it. Islam failed. It failed culturally. It failed economically. It failed politically. It failed socially. And one example that demonstrates this complete failure is the example of slavery. Where is your caliphate today established by Muhammad?
Okay, look, first of all, and I said this at the beginning of this whole debate, I said, look, I am very careful when I make statements, and I will be honest when I see wrong, even amongst the Muslims. I'm not going to hide things here. One thing I want to say is this: the slavery that took place in the West and the slavery that took place in the Western context has its own genealogy and it has its own DNA. It was totally different how it was manifested. Remember I was saying that?
Yeah, you did say that.
I have a picture on my phone that my phone died, okay? And I found that...
We'll just believe you. Go on.
I have this amazing... I found it fascinating. It was a painting of a merchant, an Ottoman merchant, and his slave. and the slave, and the article was about white slavery that many people don't talk about. Yeah, there is such thing as white slavery that took place.
Those of us who know church history know all about the slave trade of the Ottomans.
Yeah,
because we suffered it.
Yeah, and there's many things that I disagree with what the Ottomans have done. I will say this here. Now, the picture is of the merchant and his slave. And you know what's so funny? You wouldn't be able to tell who the slave is and who the master is. Okay? So when you say things like, well, the Ottomans didn't abolish it, it's because their perception of slavery was totally different. We cannot compare the two.
Yes, we can.
No, we can't. Why not? Look, one reason, I can give you one. Now, you said that slavery was started by the Enlightenment period. Now let me actually correct you and teach you some history that you may not be aware of, not because you're stupid, you're a very intelligent man, but maybe because you're just not aware of it. Pope Nicholas V, he issued a papal in 1492, I think, or 1495. Why was a papal? A papal for the Muslims is an equivalent of a fatwa. And the fatwa was based upon what? It was based upon, and this is why I say, politics. Alfonso V, he was the king of Portugal, approached the Pope in 1492, and he said to the Pope, Pope, the Saracens, who are the Saracens? The Muslims. The animists and the pagans in Africa, they have this gold trade, and they're benefiting from it. He is obviously a politician. You should subjugate them to Christianity. What did the Pope do? The Pope, and it's called the Ball, right? It's very famous. It's a very famous paper. All of you go and Google it. Pope Nicholas V, the papal or the bull, and he issues, and in it, and we have it till this day. He says, and hereby, by the decree, I issue that Alfonso V has the right to go to enslave the Saracens, to enslave the pagan Africans and the animists. And you know what that is? If you know the transatlantic slave trade, you know that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to come to Africa and to torment and to destroy the lives of millions of people. Millions of people. I'm obsessed and I hate ISIS. I say this in the camera. I hate ISIS from my heart. If I could, I would fight against them. Yeah? They've killed 100,000 people. The transatlantic slave trade has killed 12 to 30 million humans, and these are conservative numbers. Now, I've just shown you how.
I'd like to reply to this.
Yeah, I've just shown you how a government, an organization systematically decreed, allowed a state, a European state, to go and enslave other people. And that is, if you ask me, the Pope is the head of the Vatican and has been the head of the Vatican for a very long time. If you ask me, that history clearly points out to you and shows you the differences and the slave trades. And I'm not.
Okay, can I reply? Sorry.
Are you proud of the Pope, the Christian
So
Pope,
one
for doing that?
second. 1 second. He has just compared. Which Pope was it?
Pope Nicholas.
He has just made Pope Nicholas equal to Muhammad.
No,
so in other words,
I
a
didn't.
bad example of a pope is as good as Muhammad. That's what he just did.
No,
because
I didn't.
Muhammad permitted slaves. Muhammad permitted his followers to invade lands that were not their own and suppress Christians. Do you know what it's called? It's called dimitude. If you don't believe me what dimitude looks like, go and speak to the Greeks. They had 400 years of it shoved down their throats. Go and speak to the Romanians. Go and speak to the Hungarians. Go and speak to the Albanians. Go and speak to the Lebanese Christians. Go and speak to the Georgian Christians. Go and speak to the Armenian Christians. Go and speak to the Coptic Christians. Go and speak to the Ethiopian Christians. All of these groups, Dawood, suffered because Muhammad's Sharia law permitted Muslims to go into their lands, to steal them, to kidnap them, to oppress them and suppress them. Now his example was a pope. I'll stand here and say that that pope was a failure of a man and as a Christian. All you have to do is say Muhammad was the failure of a man and as a prophet. That's what you have to do, Dawood. I've condemned the pope, you condemn the prophet. Okay. Now, let's just say this. I want to give an attestation by a scholar. His name is John Azuma. John Azuma is not some white Caucasian apologist. He is an African scholar and he has studied the slave trade. The book that I am quoting, Dawood, for you is The Legacy of the Arab. Sorry, I can't read it because I'm getting old. The Arab...
47.
The Arab what?
47.
I can't even read it. Arab something in Africa. Page 156 to 162. John Azuma states, now you stop listening, but that's fine.
No, I haven't.
In the areas like North Africa, the Middle East and Turkey, black slaves, this is black slaves of Arab Muslims, did the meanest and the hardest work. Now bearing in mind, his argument is that the slavery of the Muslims was this benign, nice thing where you couldn't tell the slave from the free man.
No, I didn't say that.
But John Azuma has gone in to study the historical records, not just one photograph, and this is his conclusion. The first generation and plantation slaves in Muslim lands was as harsh and cruel as any other such system. Which means that the Islamic slavery was just as brutal and savage and dark and as twisted as the colonial slave trade. But here's a difference. The colonial slave trade lasted for 300 years. The Islamic slave trade has lasted for 1400 years, and it is still going on today. In Sudan, in Mauritania, in Saudi Arabia, and without any prompting from me, Kuwait. And what do all those countries have in common? Is it their economy? No. Is it their culture? No. Is it their ethnicity? No. Is it their political leadership? No. What do all four of those countries have in common? Islam. That's the problem. I am not being narrow. We've already talked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the socio-economic political context of that peninsula has been dominated by Islam for 1400 years. Muslims, even if it was not passed in law that they should not have had slaves, if their heart was truly transformed, they could have freed them. They could have ceased to participate. Like Muslims don't participate in drinking alcohol in our kuffar state. But they didn't. They did continue to sell and buy slaves. Why? Because Islam failed to change their hearts. Am I being unfair? Am I being unrealistic? Where is the fault in my logic?
No, you're right about that. Slavery wasn't ended by Islam.